He looked like just another tired traveler in seat 22A. Faded jacket, scuffed boots, a canvas tote that seemed too ordinary to matter. The businessman across the aisle sneered. The flight attendant rolled his eyes. To them, he was nobody. But when two F-35s appeared outside the windows and the cabin erupted in fear, the quiet man finally moved. He opened that tote, set a small wooden box on the tray table, and the cabin went silent. The symbol inside was one most Americans had never seen in person, a Tomb Guard badge. And suddenly, no one on that plane was laughing anymore. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe that values like honor, courage, and sacrifice still matter, join us in keeping their legacy alive. The Atlanta airport was its usual chorus of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and the occasional voice crackling over the loudspeaker. Gate C-17 was packed, business travelers in pressed suits tapping on laptops, retirees clutching boarding passes, a handful of families juggling restless kids. Everyone seemed to be in motion, buzzing with a sense of importance, except for one man. Sergeant Evan Blackwood moved with quiet efficiency, no wasted gestures. To anyone watching, he looked like just another tired traveler. Simple khaki pants, a worn navy jacket, a pair of scuffed boots. Slung over his shoulder was a faded canvas tote, the kind that looked more suited for grocery runs than cross-country flights. But his posture gave him away. Straight spine, shoulders squared, eyes that scanned the crowd once and then seemed to rest everywhere at once. A man trained to notice without looking like he noticed. When he reached the counter, the attendant barely glanced at him, sliding his boarding pass across with a mechanical smile. Evan nodded politely and stepped aboard. Inside the plane was already filling. He took a seat near the middle, 22A, by the window. He didn't mind the cramped space. After years of standing guard for hours on end at the tomb of the unknown soldier, the discipline of stillness was second nature. The passengers around him were the usual cross-section of America. 2 rows back, an older man with a cane, his Vietnam veteran cap slightly tilted, struggled with the overhead bin until a flight attendant helped him. Across the aisle sat a woman in her 60s, Margaret, her silver hair neatly styled, a string of pearls around her neck. She carried herself with the kind of dignity that comes from a life marked by both love and loss. Up front, a businessman named Allen spoke too loudly into his phone about stock prices, oblivious to the side glances from fellow passengers. Behind Evan, a younger man in a leather jacket played a video game on his phone, sound effects chirping in bursts. For most, this was just another flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., a 2-hour hop on a clear afternoon. But for Evan, every flight was a reminder. Every airport, every crowded cabin carried echoes of departures he'd seen at Arlington. The slow march of caskets draped in flags, the faces of families watching their loved ones take one last journey. He kept his tote close, one hand resting lightly on the strap. Not because of its contents, there was nothing in it that could harm anyone, but because it carried something irreplaceable. A small wooden box, worn smooth with age, engraved with the insignia of the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Inside rested the badge of the Tomb Guard, proof of the honor he carried every day. As the plane filled, Evan closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. He'd learned to find calm anywhere, in the silence of the plaza at Arlington, in the rain that dripped down his cap brim during a midnight watch, in the long flights where strangers treated him as invisible. The overhead bin slammed shut, the safety briefing played, and the engines rumbled to life. Passengers shifted, buckled, muttered. Allen, the businessman, ordered a bourbon before the plane even left the ground. Margaret sat with her hands folded neatly, a rosary tucked between her palms. Frank, the veteran with the cane, glanced once at Evan as he lowered himself into his seat. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, not of identity, but of posture, of presence. One soldier recognizing another, even across generations. The plane taxied, lifted, and climbed into the clear blue afternoon. To most, it was a routine ascent. To Evan, it was another reminder that every sky holds both memory and possibility. He gazed out the window, the ground falling away beneath him, unaware that within the hour, this ordinary flight would become anything but. At 30,000 feet, the hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as the flight attendants wheeled carts down the aisles, offering sodas, plastic cups of ice, tiny packets of pretzels. Conversations rose and fell like waves. The businessman, Alan, still talking stocks, a young mother hushing her toddler, the metallic click of seatbelts as passengers shifted in their chairs. For a while, it felt like any other flight. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. His tone was even, but there was a slight tremor underneath. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received a communication from air traffic control. Nothing to be alarmed about, but we are being asked to maintain current altitude and heading. Please remain seated with your belts fastened." The cabin grew quiet. People exchanged glances, brows furrowed. It was the kind of announcement that was meant to reassure, but it did the opposite. A few rows back, a young man pulled out his phone, whispering, "Should I text Mom?" Another passenger leaned toward the window, squinting into the clouds. "What's going on?" someone muttered. It was Frank, the older man with the cane, who first saw them. His eyesight wasn't what it used to be, but he'd logged too many hours on flight decks in Vietnam to mistake that silhouette. His hand trembled as he raised it toward the glass. "Fighters," he whispered, then louder, "That's an F-35. 2 of them, off the port side." The word spread down the row like a spark through dry grass. Passengers craned their necks, faces pressed to the windows, and sure enough, there they were, 2 sleek, angular aircraft slicing through the sky, their gray bodies gleaming in the sunlight. The distinctive shape of the F-35 Lightning II left no room for doubt. A ripple of unease passed through the cabin. Someone gasped, "Is it terrorists?" Another voice, shaky, high-pitched, asked, "Are we being intercepted?" Phones came out, cameras clicking, live video streaming before anyone could think twice. Alan, the businessman, stood halfway up, gripping the seat in front of him. "This is outrageous. What kind of airline lets this happen?" he barked. The flight attendants rushed to calm him, their own smiles stretched thin. "Sir, please sit down. Everything is under control." But everything did not feel under control. The presence of stealth fighters alongside a commercial plane was not routine, not ordinary. It meant something. Evan hadn't moved. He sat still, eyes fixed on the window, but his jaw was tight now, the calm mask of discipline covering the flicker of recognition. He knew the F-35s weren't there by chance. Across the aisle, Margaret clasped her rosary tighter, whispering prayers under her breath. Beside her, David, the engineer, adjusted his glasses, muttering, "That's a military escort pattern. I've seen it in simulations, but never like this." The passengers' nervous chatter rose, colliding with the soft chime of the seatbelt sign. Fear mixed with confusion, swirling through the cabin air. And through it all, Evan remained silent. Only Frank's eyes caught the subtle shift in his posture, the squared shoulders, the quiet readiness. Frank's hand tightened on his cane as a realization dawned. He turned, studying Evan with the careful gaze of a man who had once trusted strangers with his life. Something was about to happen. The cabin was no longer a place of idle chatter and pretzels. It had become a pressure cooker. Every click of a seatbelt, every whispered question seemed louder under the drone of the engines. The 2 F-35s outside held their formation, their wingtips glinting in the sun, like silent sentinels. Inside, suspicion simmered, ready to boil over. But a storm of a different kind was coming, one that would force every passenger to see the quiet man in seat 22A for who he truly was. The cabin was a chorus of whispers now, fear sharpening into restless anger. The 2 F-35s outside held their formation, their wingtips glinting in the sun, like silent sentinels. Inside, suspicion simmered, ready to boil over. But a storm of a different kind was coming, one that would force every passenger to see the quiet man in seat 22A for who he truly was. The cabin was a chorus of whispers now, fear sharpening into restless anger. The two F-35s outside held their formation, their wingtips glinting in the sun like silent sentinels. Inside, suspicion simmered, ready to boil over. But a storm of a different kind was coming, one that would force every passenger to see the quiet man in seat 22A for who he truly was. The cabin was a chorus of whispers now, fear sharpening into restless anger. The two F-35s outside held their formation, their wingtips glinting in the sun like silent sentinels. Inside, suspicion simmered, ready to boil over. But a storm of a different kind was coming,